Goodness, that's not on camera.
You are live. Good afternoon. This is the Board of County Commissioners Board Work Session. It is Thursday, October 13th, 2022. It is 12:04 p.m. This session is set to go until 1 p.m. This is a hybrid meeting. We're in Building 1, room 280. For public virtual attendance, you may follow along on the Thurston County YouTube channel. I'm Carolina Mejia. I'm the chair of the board. To my right is Vice Chair Ty Menser. To my left is Commissioner Gary Edwards. In the boardroom, we also have County Manager Ramiro Chavez, as well as Assistant County Manager Robin Campbell, Director of Community Planning and Economic Development, Joshua Commons, as well as Commissioner Pope. The topic on today's agenda is the post-hearing briefing, Development Code Docket A-8 Habitat Conservation Plan Implementing Ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have for you today, in terms of three elements of this presentation this afternoon. Staff is going to walk you through and summarize some of the comments you received during the public hearing, and hopefully we can consolidate some of those comments into what are called buckets. And then we'll maybe follow up in response to those buckets, one of which is going to get in more detail related to the fees and how the fees are assessed or could be assessed if the board passes. And at the tail end of the presentation, the briefing, staff will provide the board with some options that you may have. And I think you're pretty well aware of what those options are. And at that point, I will like to see what are the options you'd like to exercise at the end of this review.
Great, that's great. And I think also, thank you, County Manager. If we might step back a little bit, we've been working on this project in earnest in this form for about 5 years, 10 years from other people's perspectives, and even longer from other perspectives. But we used the marker at 5 years because that's when the Board of County Commissioners at that time gave clear direction to what was resource stewardship, then community planning and economic development, to work directly with the federal government to attain an incidental take permit through the approval of the Habitat Conservation Plan. And that board at that time in 2018 or so made some very clear statements to our staff. Direction was provided that we shall do our very best to help the single-family residents in Thurston County get the lowest amount of cost and keep going with development in the properties that were within the service areas of the listed federal species of the Endangered Species Act. So our staff heard those words very clearly, that guidance from the Board of County Commissioners at that time. And it's been said before, and I think it's important to say again, that we didn't ask for this as staff. We didn't ask for this as a board. We didn't ask for this as a county. This is a federal law, the Endangered Species Act, that the county needed to find a way forward for our residents. It's not, I think it's been described as a box before. We were put in a box in Thurston County, and the HCP that the board directed our staff to accomplish was the way out of that box, a way forward to allow for residents to develop on the property within those service areas. A lot of people didn't think we could accomplish it. Lo and behold, this last year, the federal government granted the county the ITP, the incidental take permit. So we have a way out of the box. The federal government has provided us that pathway. Part of that next step is that we in CPED take the codes that are applied within that plan and roll them into Thurston County codes so that we can actually issue the permits to residents within those service areas. So that's what we're doing right now. You've heard me talk about the 3 steps. We need to get the ITP from the federal government, we need to implement the codes and ordinances, and we need to acquire the mitigation land. This is that step 2, where we're bringing to the Board of County Commissioners, now it's our turn to implement the codes and ordinances that are related to the HCP that was approved by the federal government. And we had public hearing on that topic, implementing the codes and ordinances. We've worked with the Planning Commission. We have done, thousands of hours of outreach to the community over the past years on this topic. And then more targeted recently, we had a public comment period extended before this public hearing of 45 days to allow for more input on the topics related to the implementing codes and ordinances. I think one of the things that, going back to the county manager's request in terms of buckets from what we heard from the public hearing, they fall into two camps, really. The comments that you heard at the public hearing, the verbal comments, a lot of those were focused on the listing itself. So going back in time to when that box first got put on Thurston County from the federal legislation. A lot of that is not related to what we have within our scope of work now. That was a settled issue back in 2018 when the Board of County Commissioners at that time provided us direction to go forward on the Habitat Conservation Plan to receive the ITP. We hear the frustration with that listing. In some ways, we share the frustration with that listing. It was a box that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the federal government put around Thurston County and then provided us an opportunity to work through with them to come to this stage now. So hearing all of that public comment, we can have a conversation on a more general topic about the listing, but it's really not within the scope of the decision that we're bringing to the Board of County Commissioners. But recognize that it's heard, that it's acknowledged, that we understand the frustration. We've been living with this whole plan and program, so we are intimately aware of the frustration that this has created for our residents. That being said, we need to move forward as directed by the Board of County Commissioners. And we have a path forward, and that's the permit. That's the Habitat Conservation Plan, the incidental take permit. And now we're headed into how much is it gonna cost? Because the alternative to having a permit is we would have no development in those service areas because of the Endangered Species Act. So we've got a path forward. The conversation on the implementing codes and ordinances is the fees. We did receive a number of comments on the fees that were written from the partner organizations within the community, environmental, business, realtors, developers, individuals. A lot of folks looking at the calculations that we've had listed for over a year now. We've had the calculation estimates listed on thurstonhcp.org, so this shouldn't come as a surprise. All of these numbers have been out there in the community. One of the things that I think is important to remember is that the board asked us way back, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, in that same conversation of making it less expensive for residents in Thurston County, to not have a one-size-fits-all approach on the cost. I think some of the confusion on the cost has been in that conversation. There is a $51,000 number that is for developing an entire acre and the area that's related to the Olympia pocket gopher. That's just one part of the range. What we've been able to negotiate's the wrong word, but demonstrate through economic development reviews, land values, development futures of the different service areas throughout Thurston County is to whittle that down, is to be more precise. And that's what the calculation form has relayed to the community for over a year. It's been an interesting process to make sure that people see that information, but those are really the two buckets, is the listing and the fees from the public comment. So I'll stop there.
And I want you to clarify something, right? Because as we see that the Olympia pocket gopher area seems to be the most expensive. And in the presentations that we've been given in the past about purchasing mitigation land, that has been the area that we've faced the most difficulty with purchasing land, and the one that we're actually behind on, I believe. And is that why the price is the highest, just because it's been kind of hard to purchase the mitigation land in that specific area that we need to?
So those two topics are related but separate. So first off, the realtor that we've hired is doing a great job looking forward and trying to find willing sellers for the purchasing of those areas. Looking backwards of how we developed that number, that I'll let Chris speak to in terms of the economic development reviews that we've done, the land value calculations, all of the external consultant work that went into those numbers.
Yeah, so when we looked.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Before you dive into it, I believe there is also a couple of comments related to the personal experience that some individuals that went through and trying to secure their own habitat conservation plan through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. And I believe that you receive a couple of citizens who were verbalizing their frustration to go through that. Mr. Development was successful. I think he is persistent and he was able to go through. Can't remember the other individual who.
What was the other one? Friedrichs?
Friedrichs, he provided a perspective. They started engaging on with the federal government and got frustrated was for him and he couldn't finish that process to get their own HCP. And the reason that I'm stating this is going back to the analogy that Josh stated, the box. And the HCP is a way to get out of the box. It's a ladder, really, to get out of the box to provide the citizens who experience the frustration with the federal government to secure their own HCPs. This is an avenue that can streamline the process. And I also would like to touch base back on what Josh stated, because I think it is important for the public to understand, is the how the listing was put in place. All of us at that time had our own opinion. And it was related to whether how many, actually what I call my heads that we have currently, and how many heads we'll have in the future to claim that species is recovered. And all that was a part of the conversation back in 2014, 2015. But it's not unusual for the federal government to list a species and have the habitat to be as a way to mitigate it. And we have seen that on my own personal experience, even goes back beyond the pocket gopher, is the western gray squirrel. And the western gray squirrel was listed as an endangered species, and the way to mitigate was protection of the Oregon white oak. And that's how you see them till today. The Oregon white oak is a protected species of a tree because it provides the habitat for the western gray squirrel. So I think it is important to emphasize that a little bit more, if I may, Josh, because the box, Josh explained, it was not because we raised our hand and said, build a box, we like to build a box. The box was put in front of us. And I believe it is our responsibility to find a way to get out to the benefits of the residents of Thurston County in this stage.
Can I make a question, Madam Chair?
Go ahead, sir.
Just real quick, since you mentioned, we're talking about public comment, and you mentioned Mr. Tibetan. Mr. Tibetan, I believe, has testified at least a dozen times in front of the Board of County Commissioners, urging us to pursue this incidental take permit. And then he came to the public hearing, and I did not hear that message from Mr. Tibetan. So I'm just wondering, did he change his mind in some way? Did my seatmates have any insight? It didn't sound like he was supportive of this implementation ordinance, but maybe I was misunderstanding his comments. And it just really threw me totally back against the wall after like I say, a dozen times he's come and urged us to get moving on this.
I won't be able to respond to that, what the intent of his comments were. I think he was more, I believe, relaying the experience that he had by going through the personal HCP with the federal government and the frustrations associated with that. I agree with you, Commissioner Mansur, that in past testimonies he has urged, not just recently, over the years, urged the Board of County Commissioners to continue with this process to get us an approved HCP. And also over the past testimonies, you heard in many occasions how frustrated he was just going through their own HCP, so which I believe those two are related. But I will not be able to respond in terms as to what the testimony was the way it was.
I guess my takeaway is that, yes, he wants to see the county do this. And he still supports.
Didn't feel that way at the hearing, and I was just like, I was really, when he stepped up, I was, thinking, okay, Mr. Tibetan's really gonna, being one of the only people in this county that's gone through the alternative, he's really gonna make a powerful argument as to why this would be a benefit to the citizens. And I was just left not hearing that message that I so expected and sort of welcome to hear, because we put so much work into providing this alternative pathway, and he can detail just how horribly difficult and time-consuming and expensive it was to go the other route. So I just wanted to make sure that nobody had heard. You guys talk to him frequently, and we're discussing public comments. So I just wanted to know if anybody was aware of why that message didn't come through, if he's had some problem with the ordinance. He didn't really get into the details of this ordinance. He just didn't connect those dots and say, if we adopt this, I wouldn't have had to do all of that stuff I had to do.
I think that's what he intended. I'm not sure, but I think so.
So,
What about the Haynes family? Wasn't it Haynes, Tumwater?
Haynes?
Just young.
I'm not sure what the question is.
Oh, wasn't there another party that did the, federal?
Something,
What was it?
it's gotta make, the other person that's gotta.
McLean.
It's Mr. McLean, and McLean, he was not part of the public testimony,
No, but
but
he did.
absolutely on point.
Same
And
thing,
He
right?
was the first one.
There's been.
Yeah.
He was the first individual HCP that was granted, and Mr. McLean was coming on a daily basis, as you may remember. And his story was very frustrating, and very frustrating for the board at that time, very frustrating for the staff because we couldn't help him. Because it just couldn't help him. And I believe his story and that of his family was so heart-wrenching.
I believe they both the husband and wife, both had a parent die
Right, it
during
is,
the process.
and it was so heart-wrenching that it was the inability for the board and the staff to help him was extremely difficult. But he was the successful, the McLeans, they ended up having their own HCP, he ended up setting aside an acre of his property as a protected habitat. And that was I think pivotal also for the county to take the responsibility to manage that.
Which ultimately was the success portion of his permit, was that the county was willing
Yep,
to be the overseer
yeah.
of that, if
So
you will. That was the only way we were.
Yeah, at the end, the county helped to just,
Yeah.
although I don't think it was the success of that process, at least from my point of view, didn't meet the timelines that he and his wife was.
For sure.
And I go back to Commissioner Mintzer's inquiry on Mr. Tibetan. I agree that he didn't fully get to the dot connection in the public hearing, but he has been a big part of our progress with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service this whole time. While he's been working to complete the 2 HCPs individually that he's been working on, our staff and myself have been in conversations with him. He's been very vocal that the path forward is for the county to get the HCP and the ITP and to move forward. So I can't speak to why he didn't quite make those dot connections in the public hearing, but I can attest very clearly that he said the board should approve this going forward.
Some people don't articulate quite as well as others.
Well, yeah, I mean, he got,
There was a lot of energy in
his
that.
comments got applause from the people opposing, so I, like, at least, you know, at a minimum, people in the room were not connecting those dots in the way that I think he might have intended.
And you've got a whole packet of all of the comments that were provided. I want to make sure, part of this conversation is obviously we want to think about next steps, but I want to give as much time as the board needs to reviewing those public comments that you've received as well. I think that there were some very thoughtful and intuitive comments in there that we have really acknowledged.
Follow-up questions from the colleagues?
Yeah, I do, I have a list.
Oh, no, I didn't know Josh was done. I thought he kind of got interrupted there.
No, I'm open to receive your input or questions on comments. Or anything else for that matter.
Well, okay, I'll just throw something quick out. The difference between the two designations, say Yelm versus Olympia, is doesn't property cost more up in the Olympia area? And I don't think we got to that.
You're
Yes.
right. That was
Correct.
Commissioner
I thought we
McGee's
missed
question.
that.
Correct.
So, circle back to the.
The cost of real estate is more expensive when you get into the urban areas.
Yeah. So,
It's simple,
okay,
but we did a lot of work
I
on
thought
it.
we didn't get to that point, and then I thought we'd have questions.
You're right. You're right. So what
Okay.
the county manager said is on point. That's exactly the overarching, but to provide a little more of the technical history, Chris will talk about what we did.
Yeah, so as we were developing the Habitat Conservation Plan, part of that is the funding portion of it, which relate back to the fees. And we did an in-depth study of the cost for all of the different pieces that go into the overall program cost. And by far the largest cost of the entire program is land acquisition, either fee title or for development rights. And it's actually 56% of the overall cost of the program. And the closer you get to our urban areas, the more expensive it is. And it happens to be that the more expensive area overall here in Thurston County is that Olympia Tumwater area, which is what encompasses, or which is what the Olympia Pocket Gopher area, our service area encompasses. So you'll notice also YPG North is a little more expensive, but that is immediately adjacent and encompasses the Lacey UGA. So the further north you get in Thurston County to our urban cores, the more expensive it becomes. That's the long and the short of.
Yeah, so a lot of technical work went into developing those numbers in a more precise way to reduce the cost where the cost could be reduced for the permit fee dependent upon land value. And that was a direction from the Board of County Commissioners. We brought that to U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they said, demonstrate to us why you think that we should be more targeted with our approach and the cost for the different areas. And that's how the different service areas, it's one of the ways that the different service areas came about, was our request to reduce the cost for the folks where the land value was less. And so while it looks more complicated, it was a way to honor the folks that had land value that was less than other areas. Do you want to add in?
The service areas were already in place
Part of that
there.
discussion.
As part of this discussion, we wanted to make sure that we were directly tying those costs to the property, so that we weren't,
One
inflating.
size fits all.
Exactly, there was
And
no
that
one
was a
size
good
fits all.
point, if I, just a quick comment. Back in 2017, 18, the conversation was this $46,000 per credit.
42, I think, wasn't it?
What there-
I can't really,
It got stuck, didn't it?
I don't know where.
$42,000 gopher tax.
What was it?
$42,000 gopher tax.
Yeah.
$42,000, you know.
In the newspaper.
And at that point, it was a flat fee,
Yeah.
the proposal, flat fee. And I think going through the process and following the direction of the board at that time, we need to bring a little more strategic, because at that point it was benefiting I think I use your word, the mom and pop trying to build a home and trying to reduce that fee. That's really the result of this whole process. So the $46,000 adjusted for $42,000 adjusted for inflation is where you see the high end of this.
It's 51.
Just put plainly, if we'd gone with a flat fee at this point, and again, it wouldn't have been 42,000 because we've adjusted the plan scope and reduced acres and all that, but if we'd gone with a flat fee approach, it would have been cheaper for North County and more expensive for South County than it is now.
Maybe.
Why maybe?
Because undetermined, the US Fish may have said that the land value should be what the top end is across the board. We just don't know, it's a path not taken because we took the better path of being more strategic.
No, but I think what Commissioner Messer, I think is a point about, is that if you have a flat fee, just aside from what the U.S. Fish and Wildlife could say or not,
Yeah.
from the, just a little quick math, you have a $42,000 per se.
Yep.
A flat fee. The South County would have to pay the same fee as the North County.
And that's why I said maybe, because that could have been a path.
If it had been
Yeah,
passed
yeah.
that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
what this oil.
It would
100%.
have been that way.
Because a flat fee is a flat fee, right?
Right.
And applies to south, north, east, and west.
I'm just saying, the choice was made to scale this
Yes.
fee schedule, and that, the net result of that is that a little, somewhat more expensive for North County, somewhat less expensive for South County. But yet, so you're taking this and now you're spreading it, and of course, then what we heard in the public hearing was everybody grabbing onto the high number and acting as if that would be applied across the whole county, when the whole intent of the scale was to make it cheaper in South County and reduce the cost for the most typical types of projects and requests we get. So that was lost in the public hearing. I just wanted to kind of make that point. I had a question about, so the conservation futures, I know somebody said there was an email that came this morning. I hadn't seen that, but is it about, I just wanted to, in going through comments and writing down questions as we go through a final checklist here, did we get legal opinion? And I'm assuming when we addressed this, I'm just not remembering, back in 2019 when we gave, authority to the approach of to the use of conservation futures, and we were debating how much to use, but have we cleared with legal that that's appropriate, we can use it for this purpose, even though people are getting mitigation credits for it, and it's not a gifting issue or any kind of
So
problem
the
like
short
that?
answer to that, we have purely legal, and I have shared the recent correspondence you received today, raising the same issue.
Is that the same issue that came
Yeah,
up?
and legal counsel, just before noon, Robin was with me in the meeting. The recent correspondence has not raised any red flags from the legal point of view. And your attorneys are more than happy to give you more detail as to how they conclude this in an executive session if you choose to. But the email that you received this morning, and again, has not raised any red flags from a legal counsel.
So, okay, thank you, that was one thing. And I don't know, Madam Chair, if you're gonna let me keep going, I
Yeah,
have
go
a list
ahead.
of questions, okay. So this chart, which shows, fees ranging from 1,200, up to the very top would be 4,200 based on up to the 10,000. And that's based on 5,000 square feet of impact. So like when a couple of public commenters were like running through hypothetical scenarios, and they said, well, I ran through a project and they went through a few different permutations and one guy had one permutation, but so like if they were saying, if I wanted to build a 500 square foot shed, or not shed, it wouldn't be a shed, but like a detached office kind of thing. Well, that's, this chart's based on 5,000 square feet. So 500 square feet could potentially be 10% of that cost necessary. Because, you're just, the numbers in here in this chart have the assumption baked in of a 5,000 square foot impact, which is, would be a substantially sized residence or.
So, and thank you, just to put a little more in perspective, what the 5,000 square feet of disturbance will be.
Mhm.
It will allow a citizen to build a 2,500 square foot rambler. Plus all the disturbance of driveways, septics, and any landscape areas.
Okay.
That's at a 5,000 square foot will do of disturbance.
Right.
If a citizen would like to build a 2-story, that footprint will be reduced. And those are the options the citizens will have. Those the options, because if somebody's looking for a rambler, 2,500 square feet, the footprint is larger. Say, well, this is my fee, I'd like to reduce my fee, may consider building a 2-story home, reducing the footprint and the impact as a result, the fee.
And so you guys, and thanks for remembering, so kind of my question that I'm getting to is, I think you guys heard those comments, and do those seem, there's nothing about those comments that were off base in terms of what they did and the calculation that they ran. Obviously I'm not saying that you're validating their number to be exactly right, but was there anything just that they're off base on when they said, hey, I ran this type of project through the calculator and I came up with $1,200 or whatever? That's.
Those that we heard that used the calculator, it appeared that they used it correctly.
Okay, that's basically what I'm trying to confirm, because they went through, there was 4 or 5 different scenarios and none of them were $400,000 that I heard about something or whatever. They were very, I'm going back to when the Board of County Commissioners was presented with this, and this was pre-inflation, pre-COVID, everything. We were very curious about this question. How much are citizens gonna have to pay, given the different parameters that we've tweaked to try to reduce the cost? And Jennifer Davis was the one presenting at that time, and I remember it was over at Public Health Building on a Commissioner's Planning session, and we went through some scenarios. And she could only guesstimate because we were still doing a lot of the details, but we needed to know, we weren't gonna give you guys a thumbs up unless we heard some ballpark sense of scale. And what we were told is that the typical type of projects that you can kind of dial up here would be 2,000 to 8,000 is I think what she said. And we looked at each other and said, okay, I think we can manage, I think we can live with that because of all the value it's gonna, and I actually met with the Olympia Master Builders representative at that time, who was Erin Hall, or I think her name was. And she took a deep breath and she's like, I think we can live with that. That's because it's gonna cause so much less delay, so much less, we went through that due diligence. And now that we're here, COVID later, inflation later, all these things, the scenarios that we're hearing to me seem consistent with what we what we contemplated. I mean, if you guys came back and said, you know, in 2022 and said, it's gonna cost, you know, a person that wants to build a barn in Rochester, you know, $75,000, we would have probably said, well, put the brakes on, we gotta figure this out somehow, like maybe that's not gonna work, but I guess what I'm saying is, this has been consistent, and where we're at, I don't think is really out of line with where when we put this train on the tracks to try to get to a solution. I'm feeling like, you know, nobody's happy about any fees that related to this, but the scenarios that have been run through for typical projects seem within the bounds of what the commissioners were presented with a few years ago. So I'm good with that part. Some of the comments, just random comments that we've gotten is, there was 2 comments, I think both from Phillips Burgess and OMB about adequate documentation of credit equivalency. And that's, I guess this is if you're going to a mitigation. I mean, do you guys understand what that's about, and is that something that's a concern, or?
I do understand it. I do not think it is a concern. I think it's a conversation that needs to be had with those specific commenters and or property owners who would go to an independent mitigation bank.
They have the ability to do that?
Yeah.
And then it's just about what they have to show us to show that that's
Right.
meets our requirements of our incidental take permit.
Right, and it's pretty simple. It has to be a mitigation bank that's been approved by U.S. Fish and Wildlife.
How many of those are there?
At the moment, there are no conservation banks approved by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There are
That have available credits.
that have available credits.
That's a good, yeah.
Yes, there are.
They've sold all their credits already?
And that's the service that the county is providing. Since there aren't any available credits out there, that's what this fee is for, is that you don't have to go and try and find somebody that's got these credits. We've got them, you pay this fee, we'll work on the back end to make sure that it's insured. What the commenters are saying is, what if we come to you with credits that aren't part of the county system, what's the equivalency? And show us, we'll have a conversation about it. We're interested. If it meets the requirements that Chris said, if it's U.S. Fish approved credits, it seems to us that it should be allowable and equivalent.
On the flip side, we got an email from somebody commenting on behalf, I'm quoting, on behalf of 1,300 members of Black Hills Audubon Society, the HCP ordinance should stipulate that mitigation must take place in Thurston County. We do not want landowners to purchase credits from mitigation banks that have land outside Thurston County. Please make this change. It wouldn't occur to me that would be permissible, but am I wrong about that?
So that would be, in the end, up to U.S. Fish and Wildlife when they're permitting their, when they're going through their permitting process for mitigation banks. But we have to remember that the Mazama pocket gopher, the 3 subspecies that are listed are only known to be found here in Thurston County,
So to answer our plan
our plan.
only mitigates within Thurston County.
Correct.
So that comment, we will not accept credits outside of Thurston County because we can't.
Can.
So that's,
I mean, these ranges are really tight, so I don't see how anyone could.
And I think if, for instance, if for any wild reason, Grace Harbor County has a mitigation side to mitigate for pocket gopher impacts, the question would be, why would somebody will go through that process since there's not an existence of the subspecies in Grace Harbor County? So that scenario seems to be a little bit of impractical from my point of view.
That DNA business is debatable.
Well,
One of the questions.
I don't wanna go there.
Another question that I saw was about, I think this is from OMB. It was about, like, my understanding is like this program gets adaptively managed in a sense as through the 30-year life. And they were sort of asking, well, can that go both ways? Like if land price falls and can we reduce the fees? And I would think the answer to that would be yes, because we've got to sort of manage for making sure we have the resources to purchase and that could potentially go up or down.
Right, so the fees will be the board's decision. What is written into the Habitat Conservation Plan is that we reassess those mitigation fees for the first 5 years annually, and then every 5 years after the 5th year. That makes sense?
and they can go up or down.
And they can go up or down, and we would bring that information back to the Board of County Commissioners, who would make the ultimate decision on making any changes to those fees.
And it's every year because we haven't done this yet, so we
Right.
need to know, A, can we purchase the land for the amount that we're being received? Does Conservation Futures have the funds to fund some of that purchase? And also, what's the cost of maintaining that property as well? Because we're contracting with external entities to do all the stuff that gives us the lift on the property, all the mowing, all the making sure that its habitat is high credit value, best bang for the buck for our applicants. So all those things, for the first 5 years, we're gonna come back to the board every year and say, here's where we think it could be tweaked up or down, here's what we found. We're gonna learn a lot, but we need to get started to learn those lessons.
And so we heard multiple comments during the public hearing that this is a money grab of the county, follow the money. That was perhaps the most disheartening piece of the public hearing from my perspective, because, correct me if I'm wrong, every dollar that's collected is going directly into satisfying the requirements of the incidental pig permit, thereby allowing us to issue building permits to folks. And is there can you confirm for anyone listening that not a single dollar of fee is going into general fund or some other place that the county would be spending it on anything but what I just described?
Not from our perspective, but I'd like our assistant county manager to confirm that.
I would confirm that.
It's really important because it's a very inflammatory accusation. It was made by multiple people at the hearing. Like I say, we've done so many things to try to keep these fees as low as possible. From reducing the, acreage, through all the different programs, that I kind of outlined before. That I asked Chris about, where we changed the number of species, we changed the percentage of estimated build out. We did all those things to take 6,600 acres down to 3,100 acres so that we could keep the cost low. We committed $500,000 a year of our conservation futures, which is general tax money that the public pays, not these property owners. That's $15 million investment subsidy toward this program. And then we scaled the fee structure in the way that we described. All of those steps designed to keep the cost as low as absolutely possible.
So we could, I have not read this ordinance in its entirety, but we could make sure that there is a clause that goes into the Thurston County Code that states that all fees collected go into the Habitat Mitigation Fund that the board has established. That fund is specifically funded by fees that are collected. That's stated in the establishment of the fund, but we can also make sure that in the section of the code where the fees are established, there's a clear statement that they are to be deposited into that fund. And we've done something similar with the recent, what's the climate initiative that the board just passed?
The C-Pacer?
Yeah, the C-Pacer program.
Commissioner Edwards?
What's the, I want to go back to the question, but I have a question that I need to ask about this. But what's the schedule right now? So just say today, what, you're going to look for a thumbs up towards a EIS? to
So
come forward?
that will be at the end, I will provide you some options. I think that's what you asked.
Yes,
Which has a time component.
that's what I'm looking for.
Maybe I can probably introduce the options that you may have at this point.
Yeah, maybe so.
So the options the board has is approved as is, as presented to you, and
Yeah, but we're not going to do that today.
no, but you can probably provide direction.
Direction, present an EIS or whatever.
Present an
For a
EIS.
future meeting, okay.
You have the option to request staff to go back and do additional
And
public
fix this,
outreach.
or-
No,
okay.
or public outreach, fix this suggestion by Bob.
Okay,
Or you can do nothing.
okay, so now can I go to my question?
But I'd like to probably, I think each one of those has a little bit of, yours goes about risk, right?
Sure.
The approved that is, we implement the program as presented to you and provides the benefit, which most likely will start January 1st, 2023.
Okay, that's the date I was looking
Right.
for.
And because that's what the incidental take permit that we receive from federal government takes place.
Okay, the take permit actually becomes effective
It's
January first.
It's effective now.
I thought it was effective now if we had.
We
this-
can't, but we
if we
can't
had
do anything
done.
with it because we don't have the codes and
Right,
ordinances.
Yeah.
so it's January 1st. So there's a little bit of time perhaps, they work and direct staff to the additional outreach. But what I'd like to probably focus is on they do nothing alternative. In that they do nothing alternative. The federal government will not authorize, at least from my humble perspective, another interim process. Because from the federal government perspective, they had met their obligation to issue an incidental take permit.
Yeah, okay.
And so they do nothing carries a little bit of, I'm gonna use the box, and I will again.
Puts us back in the box.
We're gonna be building our own box. Because by default, we will not be able to issue any permits. And by default, we might probably consider a de facto moratorium on those properties. The property owners could go through the same process of securing their own HCP through the federal government. That continues to be, will be an option on the do nothing alternative. So I just want to highlight
Okay,
the three
so-
alternatives.
So now, I do have a question to see if it's possible. Is there any chance, because we've got a little time until January 1st, theoretically, if this was to kick in, is there any chance that you could take some applications that have already come in? We kind of know so-and-so's on hold until we get this done. Okay, different ones. Could you, I don't want to say process, but I guess maybe process is the right word. Could you process those applications, everything but issuing the building permit, for an example, or the septic permit, however the sequence, how that comes about? So that when January 1st comes, you've got 25 permits ready to go. January 1st, boom, you're out the door. And what I'm getting at with this is utilizing this as your criteria for putting together what the permit might cost. And for individuals that are concerned that it's $100,000 or whatever, we've heard some pretty high numbers. That, no, in fact, this permit has been figured out through this form, and the fee is gonna be $1,827, $2,800, or $4,200. I don't know what it's gonna be. We don't know yet if we don't process that permit. And then we would be ready to go. You wouldn't have a backlog necessarily. You'd be ready to go as soon as we did our bureaucratic thing, whatever that is, the process that we would follow to get everything through. So is that possible? And you could then take any number of these permits, black the name out on it or something, and say, okay, well, here's a permit from Waldrick Road where they want to build a house, and it's going to be 5,000 square feet, and it sits back from the house or from the road, 100 feet, whatever it is. And be able to say, okay, the end result following the permit is it's going to be $3,200 extra to deal with the gopher. Now, I don't like dealing with the gopher. I almost sound like I'm a proponent. I truly feel it's extortion by the federal government. But they're they have a bigger stick than we have. So we're stuck with it as far as I know. But why couldn't we have examples that we could point out to those individuals that have concerns about this this isn't gonna work, this is highway robbery or whatever. I mean, if we take $1,000 for somebody unnecessarily, that, to me, that's robbery. And it's legal robbery, the way this whole thing is set up. But it is what it is, we're stuck in this box, and we're trying to figure out a way out of the box. Is it possible that you could do something like that, where you've already got applications in, ready to go? Like right now, we're still under the interim process, I guess, right? Aren't we under the interim process yet? So it's my understanding that since June, we've been going out making studies on property to see if it's the kind of property that might be impacting the species. And then we have to cut that off, like, I think October 15th, we have to cut it off. So our staff can go out and verify if it was done by a private contractor, that I guess that they did everything right. I happen to disagree with that, because I feel that if a professional with a license has signed off on something, that ought to be good enough. But that's maybe beyond our scope today. That's something I guess we can take up later in a lot of different arenas, whether it's a biologist or an engineer or anybody that might have something to do with a project in which they have a state license. Anyway, is there any reason that you couldn't do some right now, get it all ready, January 1st, well, here you go, give me a check for $2,800, along with the price of the permit and everything else that goes with it. But this portion of it is an extra $2,800. Is there any reason you couldn't do something like that so we could have some examples that are real examples kind of figured out? Well, here's what this party has to do. I don't know about releasing information about names and addresses. We block that part out or something. But you would have the work done and ready to turn it over to the citizen as soon as you got the check. I don't know if I articulated that very well.
So I think I can answer that in a couple of different ways. The first one, I think the county manager did a nice job of outlining what happens with option 3 if there's nothing done. The first option, which is approve it, and we can implement the codes and ordinances and do an actual application. There is the second path. We heard the level of energy and frustration about the confusion about the costs, right? And we are offering in CPED to take this template, which we didn't want to have. We had these calculations available, but we created this shiny draft sheet for the Board of County Commissioners to review, and we could take this down into the community and work through some of those scenarios to hopefully take down the temperature of the fear of the $50,000 or whatever that may be. And so that would be the option 2, where we could spend the next couple of weeks or months and come back to.
Do we have time to do that?
If this is
That's
up to
my
board,
concern.
we do, that we have the ITP, and so it's the board's decision. We could implement in January 23, or we could push it out to, say, June of 2023, if you'd like. This is all the board's, listen, this is options.
I don't want to delay it.
I strongly encourage the board not to extend that long.
We have an ITP, and I the will of the board, so
But
that's
could
the
you
first-
do what I'm
So that's
suggesting?
the first answer to the question, is we could go down into the community, short of issuing permits, and work through their case studies with the document of the formula. Now, the second answer, the more direct answer to your question, I don't know. That seems like a legal question. Can we start working on code that the board hasn't implemented? I'm not sure I know the answer to that question.
I don't know why you can't explore it. I can't
Because it's-
imagine that's a legal issue.
It's staff time.
If I may, were you?
I'm open to receive.
Perhaps were you asking if there is any applications in the queue?
Thank you.
They are waiting for this to occur?
I was, yes.
Yeah, so I think that's the question, if I may, is there any applications in the queue? They can go through this process, granted if the board approves it. So comes January 1st and you grant,
Yeah,
and you
they're ready
move
to go.
forward. So that's what you're asking,
We
right?
don't have an
Have
application.
any applications?
We don't have an application for this. That's what the codes and
No,
ordinances.
but here's a different question,
The
maybe.
building permit application, is there any building permit application that you have received that perhaps they can, and try to verbalize. They perhaps cannot move forward because this is not in place.
We've asked that they don't apply because we can't do it. We don't want to take their money at this point.
You've given us stats though, where you've said like, these
It's
are
right
how many
away.
people went through the process and like,
Yeah.
there's always like a few, like 12 or something that just got totally stuck.
We
But
can
they
bring them back.
applied and they went through some process
They-
and they hit the roadblock, they couldn't get past the mitigation.
They applied for the interim growth for review, they didn't apply for a building permit, but we could reach back out to those folks and see what they wanted to do with their project. Again, that's back to the first thing that I offered.
I mean, it sounds like you're talking about the same things, it's just Commissioner Edwards is like saying, you're saying use hypotheticals or people in the community coming to you, and he's saying use an actual, you know, it's the same thing, it's being able to show how it works, but he's saying use an actual in the queue project.
And yes,
And you're
we can
saying we
explore
don't
that
have
for
those.
sure. I'm not sure if we are allowed to spend staff time on Thurston County code that doesn't exist. That's what I'm
Well,
saying.
it'd be kind of like the same effort you'd go through to prepare hypotheticals for a public presentation on the HCP. You're just, instead of using a hypothetical, you're using a real world example, but it's the same effort involved.
But there was the piece that ready for issuance on
Yeah,
January
well, that was
1st.
another part.
That's what I'm saying.
I think we clarified because there's no applications in the queue, they're waiting for this process to be in place in order to issue that permit January 1st. But I think it's a good perspective.
Yeah.
To see if there's a little more, as opposed to use this 5,000 square foot disturbance, a little more to the ground. So we're looking
Yeah,
for-
somebody might come in and say,
Some, because people were talking about with the efforts that they're doing to get their
yeah, what about
own
that guy out in
HCD.
Rainier? The guy out in Rainier that was here?
Fredericks?
Yeah, why couldn't you go to him and say, okay, we're about ready to go here. Put your application in, let's see what happens.
And so we can talk to him about the hypotheticals, but there is no application until the board approves the application. We can definitely reach out to Mr. Friedrichs and have the same conversation that we did, talk about the site of impact, work through the hypothetical that we've got right here. But what I'm saying is we can't do that work based on code and ordinance that hasn't been passed. We can do the hypothetical.
You've got some examples
Yeah.
here, you know, that are hypothetical examples
Right.
theoretically. But why couldn't you, so you could, and those folks might very well say, yeah, use my name, I don't care. I wanna get the project done before I die, cause you know, he's a little older than I am. And I'd like to see him get his project done before he's done. And so, go to somebody like that and say, look, we've got this worked out, the board's gonna do something coming up. That would even help me to make a decision that, well, I'm not gonna say we can't do anything, because we've been working on this for 10 years, you know. I wanna get it as good as I can. I've heard today that we've covered all of our legal aspects and questions raised have been addressed. And we're gonna take a chance, we might go to court over it, okay, well, maybe that's gonna happen, I don't know, we don't know what might happen. But I wanna get this thing rolling, and I would like to have people coming in and saying, hey, I'm ready to go too. Hey, do something like Fredericks, is that what you said the name
Sure,
was?
and Commissioner, I wanna say yes, I'm working really hard to find a way to say yes to your question.
Uh-huh.
The question that we'd heard before was, if you just came to us with a hypothetical example on what a normal impact would look like, that would help my decision, and so we brought that to you. This is that calculation,
You've done pretty good.
and we can take that next step to attach a name to the hypothetical. We can work with the Friedrichs or whomever else, and instead of this being a nameless project, we could actually provide you a on-the-ground example that demonstrates the same calculation. If that would help in the decision-making process, we're more than happy to do that.
I'm just trying to expedite the process once we hit January 1st. I mean, and use it as an example, it'd be a two-pronged benefit.
It's 12:58. I guess I'll ask my question, you know, I had several questions, but I'll ask my question real quick, which was a comment that I saw from Stephen Drew, the county assessor. And kind of what the response is to that comment. And I guess for the public, it's in review, I do not see where it is required to record conservation easements, so they follow the property record and show up on title reports. I also do not see a recording requirement where credits are purchased and applied to a parcel. At a minimum, the cost and the effect on the partial should be recorded, but perhaps better addressed by CPED procedure and policy. Real-time transmittal of changes in parcel status resulting from the determination that mitigation is needed or that a scope of impact has been mitigated will be needed in the assessor's office. So just with that comment, I want to hear kind of from CPED, response to that.
There's a couple of things.
Yes, there is. So take them from the conservation easement perspective, because that's fairly simple. Yes, conservation easement, once it has been developed and either it's the county's property and a third party is holding that easement, or it's a willing property owner placing a conservation easement over a portion of their property, those easements have to be recorded. It is required. It is actually a requirement in the HCP stated in there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife requires it in order for it to be a legally binding document.
And so while it may not show up in the implementation codes and ordinances, the implementing code and ordinances reference the HCP,
Correct.
which has what the assessor is asking for.
Correct. The second piece of that is for the individual properties that receive, that pay their mitigation and receive a, what we're calling a certificate of inclusion. And those certificates of inclusion not only are attached to their permit, but that certificate of inclusion is required to be recorded on that property. And that is actually a requirement in the ordinance that's laid out, that those are recorded on the property. So because we do know that the mitigation lasts forever on that particular property, and we want future property owners to know that that particular area, wherever it is, has been already mitigated, they don't have to re-mitigate for it.
Similar to the McLean's.
Exactly.
When the McLean's reserve the 1 acre, it has to be recorded.
Yeah.
On the property.
And then all the rest is
Yeah.
clear
Yeah.
and good to go.
It's 101. So with that, commissioners, how would you all like to move forward with this?
Can you lay that out on your screen?
Or are you ready to move forward, or do we need another, are there still more questions that need to be addressed, I guess?
Just to highlight the options that we have, approve as is, obviously not asking for you to approve today, we'll bring it in as. Send the staff to do additional work, where you requested maybe one additional work may do, a per each. Or they do nothing, but I don't think the board is in the position, but those are the options that are.
And I guess to your question, is it legal for you to work on something? I don't know. I hope a bunch of people are watching this today. Can you tell how many are watching? Can't tell.
No, I can't.
But I know people are watching this today.
There's
Yeah.
12,
currently 12 people are watching.
12 people are watching. There you go, Megan had the answer.
Yeah, anyway,
But I'm sure
I would hope
more will-
somebody would come in
more
and say,
will
I
watch
wanna figure
later."
this out, but how much is my project gonna be? I'd like to see a real scenario, I guess, is what I'd like to see.
Acknowledged.
But I don't wanna delay this process any longer than I have to. And it wouldn't hurt my feelings at all okay, next week, let's have another get together and see if you've made any, as long as we're not delaying the inevitable so that we have to go to June. I don't wanna go to June of 23. But as long as we've got a little bit of time here to do it, let's not rush it. I wouldn't mind hearing a couple other things. We might get a couple questions that are developed from people that are watching. And I suppose, I'm sure people are watching. I don't
I'd be
get
curious,
well.
I'd be interested in that. I have a few more questions. I wanted to know about the HCP implementation team. What is that? That came up in a comment. And also have questions about, I didn't turn this over. So I'm worried about these two tables on the back. I think they're confusing to me, and I'm wondering if they could be made, what, 1.6 occupied, and then why are we talking about 1 acre? I mean, on here, we're talking about 5,000 square feet. Here, we're talking about a full acre of disturbance.
So
Or
this is,
anyway,
Just to give you the
this is page 1.
scenarios.
And then you take this calculation and apply it to page 2 with the scenarios. So this is your 1040
Okay, so I looked
easy.
at page 2,
Yep,
unfortunately.
like page 1 of 2, This is your form that you fill out. You've got to get again, those 1.6s and 0.75s. That was another way that we were able to strategically target the areas. And if you didn't have occupancy and you had less preferred soil, we wanted to find a way to reduce the cost. And so you've got to take your soil, you've got your habitat value, the amount of area that you're going to impact, the habitat value, you bring those together with the cost, and that gives you your total estimated cost. So start on page 1, work through the formula, the 4 steps on page 1, and in the back is as if we worked through those steps. This is the example.
So the 1.6 is how many credits you need?
It's a habitat value metric, so we had to provide, in order to calculate these mitigation fees, there had to be some metric used to distinguish between high-quality habitat and low-quality habitat, and all the pieces in between. And that's what you're seeing here is a value of high-quality habitat that was agreed upon. We developed the HCP and the lowest habitat value in that less preferred suitable habitat category.
And this has come to the board. This was part of the HCP approval process, and you see the 1.6 is occupied, so that's high value. If there are species there, it does require 1.6 credits. And that was part of what was approved in the Habitat Conservation
Or
Plan.
so much, that's just a multiplier times.
Times the area.
amount. I guess what's confusing on that is the acre. I mean, in my opinion, and I may be wrong, but in my opinion, if we lined up all the applications, how many of that involve this plan, what percentage of those applications are gonna disturb an acre or more of land?
This is all about transparency.
I understand that.
Very few, but you need that number to times, so once you've got your credit value, your credit area, then you take that number and times it times the big number, and that gives you your final number.
Are you
That's the
saying
math.
that most people will only buy a very small fraction of a credit?
That's exactly correct.
That's what I'm saying, it doesn't come through in
So
this.
to answer-
It's very
to answer
unclear.
And it's a
scenario,
draft. We're open
There
to
may be
it.
the case where a subdivision,
Yeah, I know there are gonna be a few.
will disturb not just an acre, perhaps more. But the impacts to individual property owners has to be prorated.
Yeah, but it's just not, I mean, there weren't any developers in the room at the public hearing.
There was,
Okay, did they give public comment?
they did.
Which one?
It was from Northwest Stream Homes, and he provided comment. Because that was my next follow-up question that I had, because, and it was from Calvin Dole, and he was Northwest Green Homes. And his concerns were in terms of the acres times the habitat quality, and how the habitat quality is, like how you discern that, and if it's, and the habitat quality, he says, is open to interpretation, and basically he said the formula stinks is kind of, I wrote down what he said. So that was his feedback on that. So maybe I think what things that we can do, because it is 108, is to bring real life examples. I think if we can do a little bit of outreach, bring some real life examples. And then commissioners can keep looking at the form and give feedback to staff on maybe how to make it more understandable, right? Not only for us, but for the members of the public viewing, and then bring this back in 2 weeks
No, can we have it quicker than that?
or a week? I mean, I don't
Well, I don't think in a week will give you enough opportunity to work with a real life scenario. Give us 2 weeks,
No.
would that work?
It works if you don't delay it.
Well, the 2 weeks delay the January 1st, 2023.
So we've had people that are gonna work with the schedules of the things that we already have. It may delay it a bit, but we can still squeeze it in by January 23, depending upon the board's direction. So I think that's fine.
2 weeks.
That's fine. We'll work with Chris and Brett. People do have vacation schedules coming into the holidays, but we'll work with folks to make sure it works for the board. And I will say back to this is a consolidation of information that is more in-depth, more detailed, that's been on the website for over a year. We were trying to honor one of the commissioner's requests to put on one page, so sorry if it is confusing, but we're trying to honor the board and their
I
request.
think that it would help if there was just a clear statement that an individual home would most likely not need an entire credit.
That makes sense.
Because when I think about, I gotta do things, and it looks like I need a bunch of credits, and one credit is X much, I
Sure.
can see how there's a misconception.
We're open to receive, thank you for that.
So let's target for the first week of November to come back.
Commissioners, are you okay with
Yeah.
that suggestion? Okay,
We'll make it work.
staff, are you clear on the next steps?
We are.
Okay, and we definitely, from my perspective, January, I don't want to delay it much further either, so.
Do you want a comparison to it stinks? You know, I don't think any of us are in love with this whole process. We're in the box as laid out by the county manager. And if you have an injury, your foot, and you come down with gangrene, and they gotta cut that foot off, nobody's gonna like that. That stinks. But it's gonna kill you if you don't cut your foot off. And we're almost in that pickle up against the federal government. They're the big boys with the big stick. I do not like any of this, but it's what we're stuck with. We're in this box.
Just for the record, the county manager does not like the box.
Okay.
Okay,
It stinks.
it does. 1:11 PM, we are adjourned.